This year I've had the fortune and the pleasure to read 2 more Michael McDowell books. Last year I could not get tired of talking about how much I loved The Amulet and Cold Moon Over Babylon. So if you're new here, first of all, welcome, and second, you can check my review of those 2 books here. While those 2 stories were set in the south of the United States, mostly in Alabama during the 1960s, Katie and Gilded Needles take us to the northeast coast in the New York, New Jersey area, and they also take us back in time to the late 1800s, which gives both of these books a bit of a very delightful historical flavor. This is Michelle's Melancholia, where we read books to fear and shed a tear, and today I will be once again trying to convince you to read Michael McDowell. The first book I will be talking about is Katie, which was first published in 1982. And although the book is evidently named after Katie, we'll get to her later, because the star of the show is actually Philo Drax, a seemingly unremarkable young woman living with her seamstress mother and struggling to make ends meet. But one day her fortune seems to change as she receives a letter from her estranged but decently wealthy uncle, and he's asking her to come to his aid. He's worried he is in danger and that there might be some bad people that are after his money. And Philo, being the nice person that she is, she decides that she will go to help her uncle, and this unfortunately puts her in Katie's radar, who for the last couple of months I think has been taking care of Philo's uncle, hoping to get away with his fortune. In typical McDowell fashion, the prologue in this book is horrifying. Feel free to message me in private if you want to know specifically what happens, because it is a certain act of violence that some people are quite sensitive to, but I don't want to say it here because it took me by surprise. And as always, it really set the tone for what was to come later in the story. The prologue is also when we are first introduced to Katie, who is not only selfish and a totally merciless killer, she is also a psychic. So you can't really hide from her because she knows where you are. If she's coming for you, she's very likely going to find you. So throughout the story, we follow Philo and Katie as they try to outsmart each other. At first, Philo is just trying to get the part of her uncle's money that corresponds to her. But once she realizes that Katie is unrelentless, she decides that she needs to get rid of her for good. There are a lot of twists and turns in the story. There are strikes of luck, followed by misfortune. Honestly, it was giving me whiplash because every time I thought Philo was safe and happy, something had to happen to her. And as much as I love a good villain, in this case, I couldn't help but root for Philo. She really was such a likable character, very honest and genuine, but also really strong and always stood up for herself, which kept her from being too much of a goody-goody, if you know what I mean, because sometimes when a character is too nice, you no longer like them. And I just really loved going along with her in her journey to find security and stability and her place in the world, and maybe a little bit of revenge as well. Ooh, and also love. I usually dislike romance in my horror stories, but in this one, Philo actually falls in love, and it was so adorable. So this book really surprised me. It was not what I expected at all. I only knew that it was about a psychic killer woman. So I thought it was going to be really action-packed, more like The Amulet. And it was definitely much more mellow, but when horrible things happen, they are really horrible. You know, McDowell likes to get creative with deaths and kills and all of that. And I loved every single second of it. I gave this book 5 stars. The second book I will be talking about is Gilded Needles, which was first published in 1980. I am a huge fan of understated horror, but I actually went into this one with a little bit of skepticism because it contains no supernatural elements at all. It is centered around two families that live in close proximity in New York City and whose stories intertwine with each other in very interesting ways. The first family, the reputable Stalwarts, are led by Judge James Stalwart, who takes pride in maintaining the law and order in the city and is hoping to continue this legacy through his son-in-law. And on the other hand, we have Lena Shanks and her gang of female criminals. And they run a little pawn shop as a cover for their real businesses, which include gambling, stealing, and back alley abortions. This one is also different from the usual McDowell in that the prologue is not as intense and horrifying as the one in his other books, but I still loved it because it pulls you right into the story. It is super immersive and it just gives super rich descriptions of what New York City looked like, as well as the people that live there and what's going on during New Year's Eve when the year 1881 turns into 1882. And I really felt that from that moment I was in the city. So there's just incredible world building, and that paired with so many realistic, complex characters really made me super invested in the story. There is plenty of drama in this book. There are certain characters that are getting involved in things they really shouldn't, but don't fall in the trap of thinking that what's happening is just juicy gossip. It may seem lighthearted at times, but the stakes are high. And ultimately, the things that these characters are doing have really horrible outcomes. This is essentially a revenge story. The two families end up really clashing against each other. I guess at first, each one is just trying to defend their own interests, but at some point it really becomes personal. And in this battle between a respectable family and a criminal gang, you may think you know who the bad guys are going to be, but don't be surprised if you very quickly find yourself rooting for the people that are involved in the illegal activities. I'd maybe say this one is pretty slow. It really takes its time setting the story up, but trust me, the payoff is worth it. You will want to know who gets their comeuppance and how. That is all I have for you today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these. If you are a fellow McDowell fan, which one of his books is your favorite? I am currently reading Blackwater, the full Kasky family saga, and I am in awe. It's just so good. I'm once again super invested and I'm worried that my heart is going to break. Anyways, if you haven't read any of these books, also let me know if I've convinced you. And if you end up reading any of these books on my recommendation, please let me know what you thought, and I will see you in my next video, which will hopefully be very soon. Goodbye!